So I basically just have the list of the submissions up. We're doing a very, very brief thing. And I'd also like to hear, you know, from you all. As I work through these, you know, share your thoughts in the chat. I will talk about which ones are my favorites, but not officially. Because I plan on making a video, and what I'm going to do is have categories. Because we definitely had really different flavors of maps. So there'll be an ultimate, like, Jay Barino's favorite that'll get the Discord role, but I do plan on having, like, categories of, hey, these types of maps, you know, top 3 nominees for it are these, and the, you know, the best one, in my opinion, was blank. That's my plan, but we'll see how long it takes me to get that video out, because sometimes it takes me a while. Yeah, 7, you've been here, like, the whole time. A lot of the channel members have been. I appreciate everybody who's been here for most of the streams, and, I hope it's been fun. I hope you've had a good time. There have been highs and lows, that's for sure. I've definitely gotten tilted. I've been tired at times as well. So this is in the order that the submissions were sent to me, not the order that I played them in. Rise of the Necrons by Adriano. Basically, I'm just going to go through what stood out to me off the top of my head. So I apologize if that's insulting. I'm not going to like go out of my way to be super nice or super mean about any of them. It's just literally the first things that I remember about the maps. I remember a custom faction where the units were hard to differentiate from each other. I think Adriano has addressed that since. I remember a zigzaggy pathway of base hopping because we had a mobile command center. The faction was interesting. I also remember Blood Hunters that disabled our detection and made it incredibly difficult to progress because there were invisible units that we couldn't see. Watching the KFC discussions unfold right in front of our eyes. KK&D Crossfire by the Twin-Tailed Comet. I remember, damn it, enemy reinforcements inbound, or something like that. The guy going, damn it. I don't know anything about KK&D, but I assume that this map matched the flair of the original game. But it was all infantry, Terran versus some Spawn Zerg stuff with some goofy voice lines. The Architect by Oh Man, to be honest, the only thing that I can think about when I think of this one is I want to play through the whole thing, but I remember a convoluted menu system that required dropping things out of different slots in a shuttle. But I remember it being a pretty crispy menu system, and I also remember really bullshit hitboxes for wall traps. Tearsfall Glades by Overpower. I remember a bunch of optional areas that were in a forest, but there was actually nothing. There was actually nothing in there. I remember a boss where the objective said to kill it out of the city, but I didn't read that. I guess it didn't click with me, and I remember fighting it in the city, and I beat it, but it was difficult. And I remember saving civilians and letting soldiers die. Project Merge by 3-Card Monty. I remember laughing at how stupid the optional objectives all were. But I remember I liked the idea of sort of hopping between islands in order to harvest resources, where you could just kind of be left alone, but otherwise you had to go to the low ground to get a bunch of kills. And I remember that the objectives were absurd, but the general idea was okay. I just think that the counts of things you needed to destroy needed to be modified. This was another one. It was only infantry Terran. We had a couple of those this year. And by a couple, I mean like several. The Outburst by a Kosakin was a prison break. That, honestly, that's really what it was. It was a prison break. You got extra units as you went, and it was a prison break. And we were like starting a coup, like a military coup. Horror Survival number 2 by Eprake. I remember people pooping on this one in the live stream chat for some reason. This one was not meant for one person, so it wasn't really an appropriate submission, but it really, really reminded me heavily of good vibes back from original Battle.net use map settings maps, and I would like to play this one with a group because I think it was actually quite a good map, but it was not properly represented in this event. Oxygen by Rook was like a roguelite. I'd rank this one in my top favorites. The cool fixed cameras and the way that you died and came back and you could upgrade the different things, again, is very roguelite-ish. It was a nice contained experience. It wasn't too long. It wasn't too short. You know, in terms of time, it was perfect. In terms of an idea, it was implemented really well, and everything worked. And it was fun. I had a good time with that one. It was definitely one of those things like, okay, just one more try. Just one more try over and over and over again. Impossible Assault by Azure, I just remember bullshit because the enemy started with like plus 10 armor and attack, and they sat on high grounds with tanks and arbiters. I think with minor tweaks, this one could be doable. And I like the idea of an AI that specifically is triggered to react to explicitly what you're doing. Where, like, you take a base, they send out, explicitly send out a group to immediately try to counter it. I think that's a cool idea, but I do think that the enemy just has some bullshit stuff, like the pre-play stuff having ridiculous armor stuff, so that you can't actually move out and do anything because they're just sitting up there. You can't kill them either because of the upgrades that they have. That's another one, though, that was meant for a group, and there's just no way. Just really no possible way to do it by yourself. You could probably cheese it. Lair of Death by Zeralan makes me think of the Dark Story project as a whole, which I was actually talking about on the Discord the other day. Is a campaign that reminds me, honestly, very much of the base campaigns in the fact that every map has some idea / gimmick, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, that makes you have to play in a specific way and adjust your approach. I like that. It's not always a timer, it's not always a resource restriction, but there's something that requires you to, like, do something specific or react in a certain way. I remember like a Zerg infestation level that was going up over time, kind of like a soft timer on the map that it just got harder over time, so it kind of stopped the map from getting boring if you got too far in and then just had to clean up because the enemy actively got stronger no matter how much of them was left on the map. But the Dark Story in general, again, like, really solid gameplay, and the story is serviceable. Like, it's fine. So, like, overall, I think it's a really good project overall that people need to check out. Days of Sorrow by Andrea Rosa, I think I didn't do a great job giving this one a fair shake. I really liked the map as probably what it was supposed to be, which is the late, middle, or even end of a campaign. And it's one where if I went back and played it again, I'd probably do fine on it, but it was just huge, and there was just a lot going on, and I just didn't really... I never really felt comfortable or had my bearings at any point to be able to move out and start making progress against any enemy bases, of which there were 9. There are 9 enemy bases, plus the Reaver production structures. So, again, overall, that's why I said it was too big for my liking. That's not to say I don't like maps like that in general, but I think just at the time I was playing it, I just felt that it was too much. But that's not to say I don't like that type of map in general. So I want to make sure I take a step back and kind of appreciate what this creator was able to do with not modding the game. It was just a base map. I mean, most of our StarCraft remastered maps were that way. I would say that this one was more like closest to a vanilla StarCraft experience with a lot of clever little additions like the nuking and the Terran upgrades, and, you know, getting attacked by Reavers and stuff was fine. It was just a lot. Way to Ramona by Dooner Danny was Armies of Exego. This one was like a tug of war, and what I remember about this one was just really long. Like, too long, or rather, you didn't have enough control over your hero to do anything impactful. You had to wait long periods of time before you could cast spells. I think the cooldowns for the spells were just too long, or maybe that cost too much mana. I wish that your ally was maybe a little more active in moving forward and setting up new bases or something. They do that eventually, but much, much later and very close to the end of the game. I wish they did that maybe more incrementally, and it would make the map feel a little more active. Waking the Nether Drake by Cools. I remember winning this one barely by the skin of my teeth. And I don't know how. I think I summoned it. There were like multiple events that happened, and there were timers for them, but when they happened, it's just kind of like a blur. I was able to summon a Demon Lord who then killed the Alliance for me, but he also turned on me, and he managed to kill the Alliance right before I was killed. It seemed like a pretty ambitious map with a lot going on it that probably requires multiple playthroughs to understand all the aspects to it. It seems like if you can get into a rhythm of being able to capture all of the different Horde factions, then you probably have a much better time when the Alliance shows up. But if you can't, then it's going to be kind of chaotic, which is what happened to me. Thief by Matic, another banger by Matic. I think Matic might be one of the more underappreciated technical creators. I've played a lot of what Matic has done, and Thief is a really good encapsulation of even the save load system is really impressive and always just really fun. Usually pretty contained experiences, which, because they're relatively small and concise pieces of maps, I think that allows the save load system to exist as it does, and also allows them to be very meticulously curated experiences as opposed to more on the chaotic side. Foreseen Consequences by Proudmer, I'd put this one in my top favorites for sure. Really, really clever concept narratively that intertwines really well with the gameplay. I didn't finish this one, but I definitely want to go back and play it again. I hope, and I don't know because I haven't finished it, but it would be really cool if you loop multiple times and not just the one time. It's where you wake up and then you die, and the lady dies, and then you wake up and it all starts again. I hope that it's multiple loops. I don't know though. If it's not, that would still be okay, but I really like that ghost section with the holy water and having to run from safe spot to safe spot. Really added some nice tension. Beyond the Dark Portal, I think felt like the first map of Beyond the Dark Portal. And I remember throwing pigs to stun units. Overall, pretty standard, but also very fun micro map that was a mix between Warcraft 2 and Warcraft. It was like Warcraft 2, except the combat was slower, like in Warcraft 3. I remember thinking that the spells probably needed to be buffed a little bit. Garithos with Jorgensen. Who doesn't love some Garithos, you know? Not in I like him because he's xenophobic, but the character is just interesting and goofy and funny. And I like the idea that he's conscripting peasants and you have to fight only with peasants and militia. I think the idea could have been changed a little bit to maybe be a little more, or I should say a little less tedious. Maybe have the militia timer be longer or something, or even just make it so they're just militia instead of workers. I think a map that was too big, a little too big for its own good, but otherwise really neat concept that perhaps just overstays its welcome a little bit. Boar Bolt. We all know that if Waking the Nether Drake doesn't win, it's just because Jay is nitpicking and biased. Bye-bye. Where was I? Still going down the list. Leisurely Forest Stroll by Dracon. This was Dracon trying to understand the Exego editor, and I think he learned a lot, and he was able to share a lot with the rest of us, especially on the Discord. It was kind of neat to hear about the trials and tribulations of the Exego editor. So I don't envy him, but regarding the map, I thought it was pretty well crafted, and I think comparing it to the other Exego mission, you had a lot more forward momentum. You could go as fast or as slow as you wanted, as opposed to having to wait for spells, for example. It just felt like a pretty standard but fun. You might hear that a lot from me, but still, it's true, because when you say standard, it might come with a negative connotation, but in the case of someone tried to recreate a standard micro mission, and I think it worked out to the point where I enjoyed it, and it wasn't just blah. Lots of items. I think Dracon went out of his way to try to put a bunch of goofy Exego items around the map so you could test them all out and see what existed. Frame of Iridium by Fire Ally. I think that this was probably an underappreciated mission, in my opinion. Not by me, but maybe by viewers. I don't know. I can't really speak for other people. But I think maybe people saw it as kind of being a small, just like a little small idea for a campaign. But I actually see that as a really strong suit, especially for a completely custom faction that most people probably wouldn't have played as. I think that it's actually better to have a really tightly polished individual smaller idea than try to do too much and have it be kind of messy. And this was definitely the former, where you escorted the convoys got attacked at certain points, the enemy forces escalated, And then the nice little thing, too, is that you could choose to reinforce the allies up top. So I had a good time with that. Duke Phoenix and Rising Tensions. This is like the 4th iteration of this map that I think Duke Phoenix has been working on. I think almost every iteration, or if not every iteration, has been perfectly passable, and I'm not clear on why it keeps getting changed, but I like the mixture of like a StarCraft and Warcraft feel to the combat. It's faster than Warcraft 3, but not as fast as StarCraft. I think that's nice. There was an almost unwinnable null section. I remember that too. Storm the Fortress by Zatsupachi was kind of an arcadey submission, and I don't know if I'd say this was one of my absolute favorites, but I think it's up there. It was good in this because I liked just the. We had a few of these this year where like it was something that really harkened back to. It really pulled the nostalgia strings for me with something that I would have played on Battle.net when I was like 15. And like the used map settings on old Battle.net. This one was neat because there was like an exploit that you could use, and it wasn't encouraged, but it existed, and he acknowledged it existed. I thought that was neat. But otherwise, like, the system worked, and it was like, you know, you crafted your little squad, and you could send it, and you had spellcasters as well to support you. That were probably, you know, those were really strong, maybe a little too strong, but the only thing that I definitely remember, though, is that when you were up against the Terran factions, they had invulnerable static defense, whereas they were like Protoss and Zerg, where the static defense was not invulnerable. So, it's not like a huge thing, but it's definitely something I remember. Battle for New Gettysburg by Sailory. This was one where there was like a resource mechanic, but it didn't work. The gas pickups worked, but the mineral pickups did not, and that was a shame because I feel like that map really needed that boost in income, and I couldn't use that, and it was very frustrating to me. This also started the trend of getting attacked by 14 plus Mutalisks, which seemed to be a trend across all StarCraft Remastered submissions in some way this year. This was one that I need, I'm trying to come up with different names of different experiences that I have. One that I came up with is Mapmaker Syndrome. I think this map suffers from that. Mapmaker Syndrome is where a creator crafts a very interesting and fun experience, but it only can really be enjoyed after multiple restarts of learning a specific way to approach the map. At which point you will feel like you have earned it, and I think that's great, but it's unclear if the mapmaker in question wanted it to be that way. In the sense that first playthroughs are going to be confusing and chaotic and weird, but once you choose a pathway, it works out. This map certainly suffers from it. This is Battle for New Gettysburg. Let me make sure I'm in the right spot. Yeah, Battle for New Gettysburg. Also, again, the resource mechanic. If the resource mechanic would have worked, maybe we could have eked out a victory. I also think that you had to rescue... The rescuing civilians, the civilians probably needed to be indicated somehow on the map. Mutalisk swarms, towers on cliffs, and unintentional memes. That sounds about right. But this was one where, like, it seemed like I probably wasn't having a good time with it, but it really kind of gnaws at me to go back and try and beat still, which I think is a sign of something really good. Saving Innisbrook. I'd put this one in my favorites. Again, when I say something's in my favorites, this is not, like, once they're in there, I have no way to determine whether, it would be considered, like, relative to the others. I would just say that this one was up there. This is another one I couldn't finish, but I really was having a good time with it. I liked how it was specifically tailored for one player, and I liked how you could build a little group of demi-heroes, but if you lost them, they were just gone forever. So there was definitely some consequence, but they were very strong and you could sort of collect them. Well, like Pokemon in a way, except you could field them all at the same time. But the cutscenes weren't skippable, so no stars. Remembered by Maxim Akulov was Warcraft 2, and it was literally just Warcraft 2. It played just like Warcraft 2, and it felt like a mission right out of Warcraft 2, bullshit and all. That's literally all I have to say. It's not about whether I liked it or did not like it. I think that the key takeaway from this map is it captured the spirit of Warcraft 2 very well, near exactly. So again, if anyone's interested, like if that's the only takeaway, you know, whether you want to play that or not, that's up to you. I'm just here to tell you that it did it well. With 2-1, don't forget, it was 2-1 damage. Yeah. Where are we now? Tactical Marionage Operations. This one was insane. This one, I feel like I have to put this in a potential favorites list because of the systems that were put in place. Like, you could switch out different weapons and use different vehicles and switch out different mods and stuff that you found on maps. And you could dodge bullets and slow down time. You had different ways to interact with enemies based on, like, the mods you had equipped. You could, like, pick up doodads and throw them at enemies. If you could stealth through the whole game if you wanted. You could go crazy with a shotgun. You could, again, throw doodads at enemies to kill them all. If anything, it might have just been too much. It's weird to say that because, like, in a way, there were so many options that, of course, you want a lot of content so you could try it all out, but I think each individual mission may have been too big. Like, each individual submission within it might have been too big. Like, more, like, smaller missions so that you could rotate out the equipment more and try out different stuff might have been a better choice. Black Rock and Roll Revamped 2. Always like to see additions to the revamped project. Truthfully, the first thing that comes to mind with this was, like, the sheer amount of stuff to try to learn. I think was too much for a standalone mission. Obviously, I know this is part of a much bigger project, so if you were to get to this mission in the project, in the campaign, it would make sense. For me, it felt like we had 3 separate tech trees all in one, and we could use them all at the same time. So that was a bit much. I also don't think that it was clear to me, and I wish... And this is my fault again, and this is because we're also playing further into the campaign. And not, like, being introduced to stuff, but the Arthas Raise Dead ability was not like a normal Raise Dead ability. It literally just raised a unique undead unit of whatever was killed. So I could have built an entire, like, actual undead army using that ability, and I took what was potentially the worst mana regeneration ability on Arthas. So I was unable to use that. When I finally realized what it was, I couldn't use it like I wanted to. Because Arthas' mana regeneration was piss poor, and I couldn't use any of his abilities. And he had one slot that was meant for mana regen, and the one I picked was, I had to imagine, was the worst one. So as such, I really wasn't using the faction as it was intended to be used, and I got bogged down with trying to figure out what all of the different units were. And because it's a showcase, I went out of my way to try to build a little bit of everything, and that just was, it was messy. But again, I see how if it was fit into a larger picture, kind of like Andrea Rosas, for example, it was fit into a larger picture, I'm sure that it would be a lot clearer, but overall, still a banger. Hey, Wooter. Also, thank you, Warfare. I appreciate that. We're continuing down the list. We're like halfway. We're making good time here. I didn't want to spend forever doing this, like I said. I'm just trying to think of some initial thoughts. Kraken's Last Stand. Oh, I never finished my initial thought from before. So we talked about Mapmaker Syndrome. There's another one, and I haven't named it. But it's where there are a bunch of interacting systems that are churning behind the scenes that the player never really sees, that might only scratch, like, what the player sees is only scratching the surface. That's another thing, I think, where the Battle for New Gettysburg was hitting that, too. It had Mapmaker Syndrome, but also, I would almost call it Superfluous Chaos Syndrome. We're going to say Mapmaker Syndrome and then Superfluous Chaos. Those are the two things. Speaking of Superfluous Chaos, as I've described it, I think Kraken's Last Stand is in there, where there are so many systems interacting with each other on this map that the player probably will never see or will never really impact them in a way that reflects even a sliver of the complexity that's happening. I would say that superfluous chaos is not necessarily positive nor negative. You can take it as you will, but I do think that this is something that we see specifically in StarCraft 1 submissions, where, you know, and we've had this previous years, if you've heard me say, there are times where it would be cooler, because I know what's going on these maps, but I can't see it. I'd almost rather be an observer and just watch the insane scripts that I know it's so much effort has been put into, watch it all interact together. I think that I'm not saying that would be more fun than playing it, but it's an experience that I would also like to have, because I think it would also be fun to see. Again, it depends on the context, but again, that specific thing, is something that I see consistently in certain on certain maps. Again, not necessarily positive or negative, but I will say for Kraken's Last Stand specifically, again, the enemy AI and your allied AI are always doing some wacky stuff. You love to see it. I love that you could send your allies money, in a sense that you could do less and just shove money at them and they might win for you, which is a really interesting idea. I like that it can be played co-op, but it's balanced for single player. And the Urazaj faction was weird. It was weird. I was really scared to use the Zealots that would blow up and kill each other, but apparently they weren't as strong as I was afraid they would be, so I probably should have done that. But overall, again, a seemingly very complex map that on its surface, if you just played it not knowing what went into it, you might think, oh, what a cool tech tree, not having no clue what was going on in the background. But overall, I think the Urazaz faction was fun. The Primal faction was from Alternate, also very fun, and it's cool that all the enemies were the custom factions from the two projects put together as well. So overall, really cool idea. The factions weren't confusing to use. There was just a lot going on, and hard to keep up with. Microcraft by Eclipse. Maybe a bit of a hot take here, but I would put this one in my favorites, in my potential favorites list. Simple concept, very fun. I had a lot of fun with this one. It was just a Goliath killing Zerg coming down 3 different pathways, but you could organize your weapons into different slots, and you had, you know, like lasers and missiles and normal chain guns and stuff. And it was just it was just really fun to play. And while when you play, you think, oh, like a nice simple concept, I'm sure it's quite difficult to make these really strange and different experiences in the Galaxy editor. So I do appreciate any of the maps that, you know, whether they're polished or not, if you do some like massive overhaul, you know, whether it's justified to do it in the StarCraft 2 engine or not is not really for me to decide, but it's more that I sort of respect the effort that goes into doing it. But it's also like we could do this, but should we? But in this case, I think it turned out great, and it was quite fun. It was a nice little contained experience. Again, not too long. And you could just kind of just play it until you felt like stopping or you lost, and it was nice. I also played that one for about 5 minutes with the wrong screen region. Let's see. Alone by Eno Mupper. This was the one we barely eked out, right? By getting those civilians to the beacon. I like how there were a bunch of things to find on this map and rescue. Oh, did I do the wrong one? Oh, I was thinking of Mechcraft. Okay, well, I just talked about Mechcraft by Bombs. Let's go back to Microcraft by Eclipse. Thank you. Thank you, Kanal. I appreciate that. Where were we? Right, Microcraft. Not we talked. The Goliath one was Mechcraft. Microcraft by Eclipse was the card game. Not Keystone. I feel like it was almost Keystone, but expanded in the sense that it placed players on an entire map instead of one lane, and you could deploy your offense and defense. I lost horribly, and I'm going to be honest, I just don't play deck building games. I just don't. I don't know. I've never been really good at them, and you have to play a lot of them to kind of build up your deck in order to build like an actual strong thing. Didn't have that. Didn't have that, so see you later, Augustin. It's entirely different from Keystone. I know you play a lot of Keystone Kill with Fire, so I really don't need the in-depth players of either one to like come at me. The point is they're both deck builders, and you pick units from your deck and you deploy them and then play against another person who has a deck and is deploying units. So yes, they are very similar. Jesus. Again, not really my style of play. And again, I got totally roasted. There is a luck element to it based on what cards you draw in order to add to your deck. Now, what I do see is, like, super unique about this one in particular, again, is that it's an entire map, and you have the ability to deploy not just, like, a formation, but, like, anywhere on the map and to utilize terrain to your advantage. And you can do that both offensively and defensively. So I think that was neat. Again, though, it's just not really my style, but that's not, you know, that's not going to take away from my ability to look at it and say that I was quite impressed with the menuing system. I think for like a subgenre like this, menus are incredibly important to be crisp and not like floaty. I've played a lot of stuff in StarCraft 2 with really floaty menus and buttons that just don't really feel right when you click on them or try to use them. This one was quite good. There was a little bit of lag in the menuing as things loaded up and stuff, but for the most part it was quite crisp and clean. Yeah, I have the list up over here at Saint Monster. I'm just going in the order of submission, except for Microcraft, which I confused with one submission. So, okay, on to Alone with Eno Mupper for remaster. This is the one with the civilians. What I really like that I find that StarCraft 1 always does this the best. I don't know why. It just feels like StarCraft 1 creators always do, like, I call them findables. Just stuff around the map with, like, that trigger, like, a completely separate, almost like side quest type event that you just sort of stumble upon and it does something cool. It gives you some units, or it, you know, it's just some sort of event with, like, upgrades, or you find, like, oh, I found a science facility, now I can get +2 and 3 on my infantry, that kind of stuff. This map had a lot of that. And to rewind to what Necron was saying, what I remember about this one was the Wheel of Zerg level of static defenses in some of the enemy bases. Also, there was a bug where I couldn't get a group of the scientists, the second group of the scientists, unfortunately, but I was still able to win by yeeting to the beacon with a dropship that was defense matrix. But overall, I think that there was just too many enemies on this map. But it was... I think, oh, this was the one too where everything cost more, but everything had twice as much HP. To be honest, it really didn't feel like that had a massive impact on the game. I'm surprised that it didn't, but it's not something that really stands out to me when I think about it. I really just didn't feel like it had a giant impact on how the game played. So that was kind of surprising. Heretic Fangs by Scythe. I liked this one. Non-derogatory comparison, it was an Arcane clone. Not to say that Arcane has, like, the IP licensed for how these types of maps play, but Scythe had mentioned that a big inspiration was Arcane, but it was, like, really big armies, really unique factions, all custom, and it was killing a bunch of was it gnolls? Yeah, it was killing a bunch of gnolls. I got killed by, like, 200 spawned wolves at the end, so I think that ending needs to be changed, but overall, like, the actual fighting was cool, and this was the one that had a hero unit. It wasn't a unit, but it was a hero selector that allowed you to move and attack move with your every available force. Like, it was like an F2 key, essentially, but incorporated into Warcraft 3. Now, for these types of maps, that I call them kind of like the attrition genre, if you will. Very different from normal Warcraft 3. Like, you don't have, like, a small force that you have to micro around with different spellcasters you keep alive. This is more like hotkey, 7 production structures, and just spam out those units. Having a select all button is incredibly valuable, so I really liked that. Also, the heroes were pretty neat, too. I remember they were pretty unique. Defensive Strongbrad Reforged by Insane Monster. Nice to see some additions to the Reforged project. Definitely a big focus on cinematics and world building. Really just takes the existing maps, so it's nice to have a foundation that's already there. I'm not trying to, like, take away from the work that goes into this, because I'm pretty sure they're all rebuilt from the ground up. But, again, you have, like, the whole concept of the maps built for you, but you kind of craft them in a way that you know that most typical players would want to see them, as opposed to how they currently exist. And the cinematics in particular, quite good, and they're not... I'm happy that the opportunity was not taken by Insane Monster to make the cinematics insufferably long either, because the potential was there to make the way too long with all these like slow panning shots, and you know, it could have been that way and it wasn't, and I appreciate that. It just takes the cinematics and makes them just way more engaging, and it feels like it adds character, a lot of character to the maps. The Stellaris by Delataru, this is another one where I think I recorded this at the end of one of my streaming sessions, and I was starting to get a bit of a headache, but I want to be clear, like, this one was a banger, and I put this one in my favorites list, my potential favorites list. It was incredibly unique, and it was not at all what I thought it was going to be. Just based on the name, the Stellaris, I wasn't sure if it had to do with, like... Okay, calligraphy is not the right word to use, but when I heard Stellaris, I thought it had to do with, like, some sort of, like, narrative thing. But Stellaris was literally, like, you were playing, like, a god creature who was, like, obsessed with fashion, and you made, like, statues of enemy units, and you could harvest, like, gear and put it on the statues to outfit your armies, and you could change, you had total control over every individual unit type to put different types of gear on each one that you could build. The beginning was very confusing, especially with how, like, the lumber costs worked, but once I understood that, it was very interesting and fun. Makes you think of Stellaris, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. I think I did skip over those. I'll backtrack to those as well. But yeah, Stellaris was really interesting, if only because you had total control, and there's a lot of replayability in the sense that you could start with any of the available enemies, which would change your loadout for what you would build and what types of items you could get. Is the statue outfitting mechanic in Fire Emblem's Three Houses 2? To be honest, I have no idea. Never played that. All right, let me back up and make sure to see which ones I skipped. I know I absolutely accidentally skipped Labrador Retriever. I must have scrolled down past them. So we're rewinding to Labrador Retriever with Kill with Fire. I think this one took place in, like, the vague tangential universe from the Hercules missions. That's not really important. I was just pointing it out. Kind of neat to see. This was one where, again, a little overwhelming at the start because there's a lot of text coming at you. Throwing a lot of dialogue in while the player has control over building stuff right at the beginning. It's not just this map, though. I'm just using this map as an example, but we had a lot of these types of submissions. I think this was on, like, Kraken's Last Stand 2. It's okay to try to give the player some story, but the more you put and expecting the player to either read or even just listen while also being given access to totally new types of units and structures, it's like a mind flood. At least for me. I know I'm an old man whose brain works slower than you youngins, but typically if I'm getting 2 to 3 paragraphs right at the start while I can control the stuff and I'm trying to read what the units can do and what I should put where, it's a mind flood. Especially if there's important things that's being told to me in the dialogue. So you might as well just make it a cinematic where the player can't even control stuff. Not super important to this map. I just thought I'd take that as an opportunity to talk about that. But Labrador Retriever I think there was even more on this map to discover that I didn't fully understand. Like some of the buildings had a lot of functionality that I don't think I was able to explore. A lot of it was kind of like a tug of war, where you placed, rather than necessarily building units, you actually placed structures, but it wasn't tower defense because you weren't building structures that actively attacked, but you were placing structures that built units to defend you, or mini turrets from the buildings. And I thought that was really cool. It's kind of like a twist on the typical tower defense concept. Also, you had enemies that would spawn behind you, so you couldn't just build like a choke point right at the front. The terrain was really good because you could set up structures anywhere, in like really clever locations, as opposed to just having like 2 really specific important choke points, for example. You could kind of put like little high ground areas to put some of the turret structures. You had stuff where like you could spawn broodlings, but the broodlings also healed the structures, but they also attacked, but you could upgrade each building to have broodlings. Again, there was a lot of interactivity with the buildings. I don't even think I fully explored it, but I liked it. And it was pretty fun to figure out, like, where to place buildings optimally. Aren't we all old? I took that stupid mental age quiz that was created by someone who's wholly unqualified, and I got 56. Oh, no. A Growing Darkness with Dark Kazoe, sent by Dark Kazoe. This one, let me think back. It's coming to me. I remember having multiple bases, and there were a lot of windy pathways. This was the one where you played as... Oh no, I'm blanking. I'm blanking on this one. This isn't professional at all. Hang on, I gotta go back and check. I'm not actually 56. I said I got a mental age of 56. As soon as I even get the slightest thread of what this map was, I'm gonna remember. I remember getting frustrated at it because it felt like it was getting too long, and I had to end up stopping. I think this was 3 streams ago. I'm going to look in my locally recorded videos. Maporino. Yeah, it wasn't Rat Day. Because I initially thought it was Rat Day, but that was not it. Here it is. Oh, with the Dreadlords. Yeah. Yeah, I was right on the cusp of remembering what it was. You play as the undead, and you have the Dreadlord who can take control. It's like you have a temporary charm, and then the unit dies. I remember thinking that ability was so cool, and I was surprised I hadn't seen something like that before. I remember you had 2 heroes, and both of them had really, really good, like, they were really cool heroes. I remember that distinctly. There were 4 towns, and you could take the towns, and then they would automatically spawn zombies. I just remembered that the bottlenecks at the very end to cross bridges were just god-awful. There's just an issue with Warcraft 3, and really most real-time strategies across the board is if you give the player only one path in, they're probably going to try to find a way around it by any means necessary, because it's not really fun to try to get across a tight bridge where your units aren't really able to clump and get across it. So, like, people talk about the different pathing methodologies in StarCraft and Warcraft. If there's one positive about the clumping in StarCraft 2 is that it allows you to not have as much trouble getting through these types of really tight chokes, and I think this map had a few too many of those. But otherwise, like, it was a solid map. We had a lot of windy, zigzaggy, interconnected pathways through the map, which allowed the enemy to attack you from multiple directions, which feels irritating when you play it, but I do think is probably one of the better ways you can design a map, if only because it makes the player have to ping pong back and forth and be a lot more cognizant of when they're going to attack, so that they don't get their main base doesn't get attacked while they're far away. You know, as a player, I like being able to try to structure my base in a way such that my attacking army will hit incoming waves so that I don't have to turn around. But just because I want that doesn't mean that a map shouldn't be designed in a way that forces me to not do that. It kind of keeps the player on their toes, and again, makes them have to think harder about how they choose where and when to attack. All right, there we go. So again, I skipped those. I'm gonna go individually down here to make sure I didn't skip any more. Thank you, Kill with Fire, by the way, for pointing that out. I guess it was your map, but but thank you. All right, and then we talked about the Stellaris, on to the next one, which was Rat Day. This one, I think perhaps the idea of the map just wasn't conveyed well to me, or perhaps I didn't interpret it well enough. You know, I don't want to put the full responsibility on the map maker, because obviously when I'm playing a lot of these, sometimes I miss stuff. I miss text that might pop up. I missed something that's clearly telegraphed to me. I recognize that, so, you know, it's easy for me to say, hey, the map wasn't good enough in telling me what it expected me to do. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm just pointing out it was either me or the map, but something happened with this map where there was kind of an intention where you're supposed to sabotage from the inside of the castle, and I really was not clear on how I was supposed to do that. We had totally custom factions where apparently the idea is, as part of the whole project, you were a faction of like undead void walkers, and all the, like, we had a weird mix of, like, we had bears and we had archers and like a weird menagerie of units, but it was about the units that factions we had conquered previously that we had manipulated and brainwashed to join us, which is why we had such a weird potpourri faction. Let's see what else about this. There were the bridges with the boats as well. I think that maybe the boats, like all the shipyards, could have been an optional objective and therefore highlighted on the map. I do think that like map highlights could be used more, not to like tell the player, hey, an attack's coming, but more to kind of give them a general indication of how far into enemy territory they're expected to go to accomplish something. Obviously, scouting is fine and good, but if you have a map with 3 lanes and a lot of pressure that's happening, the player's going to struggle to figure out where they need to focus on and where they need to go. So when you finally have a moment to breathe, or at least when I had a moment to breathe, I thought, okay, like what should I actually do? I have no idea where to actually go, because the boats stop me from crossing any of the bridges. I don't know where any of the shipyards are, and if I try to go too far through like these windy forest pathways, I get way out of position, and then I can't defend my own base. But anyway, on top of that, we were supposed to be using the guy in the throne room to go out and like sabotage some stuff. I feel like that just maybe wasn't conveyed, or I just didn't understand that properly. But overall, like, again, the idea resonates with me a lot, which is like, it's a castle siege, but there are things you can do to like, you can like disrupt the boats coming in, you can disrupt the towers, you can disrupt the enemy attack waves coming out of the castle. But I just didn't do any of that because I didn't recognize what I needed to do in order to hit any of those triggers. Amphi and the Temple, I really don't have anything to say about this one because we only played it for like 20 minutes, because this one, of all the maps that were submitted as single player but were actually multiplayer maps, this one was the worst offender in that you just legitimately couldn't progress on this single player. Like, you could, I know Stormzarn beat it, but like, this was not an acceptable single player submission. I would like to revisit it because it seemed really fun with multiple people, but I would not recommend this played by any individual person. But like, the heroes, I mean, the one hero at least that I used was a banger. He was fun to use, but you need a group to play this one, so I just didn't really experience enough of it to comment much more on it. Cheek Cheek's Red Skies. This one was fun. We played as like a specialized Protoss faction. This one was where the faction was new, but it was familiar enough that it wasn't particularly crazy to figure out. Also, you were given like high ground areas you could use for defense against the Zerg as they sort of funneled in. I like that. I like the optional objectives as you move forward. You could cripple the Zerg in certain ways, like killing those spires. I think similar to Scythe's submission, Heretic Fangs, where at the end, a bunch of random stuff spawns. This one also had it where a Leviathan spawns at the end. It wasn't impossible by any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't... Okay, so the wolves at the end of Heretic Fangs killed me. The Leviathan at the end of Red Skies did not. I guess it was easier for me to be prepared for something like that at the end of Red Skies, but specifically the second half, like the top part of the map, was very zigzaggy, and so if you had mostly ground units, which I did, or I think you could only have ground units, it was very hard to move any ground units you had into position to engage the Leviathan if you didn't know if it was coming and where it was coming from. But otherwise, I really enjoyed the submission. The Leviathan part sticks out to me, so I don't want to like hyper focus just on that. But I just remember that and thinking like, I don't know, that probably just doesn't even need to be in there. Because anything that happens right at the very end, like, what if the player finished with like 1 stalker left, right? Then it's like, okay, well, I guess you fucking lose now, asshole, you know? It's the same with those wolves. I don't know. I don't know if I've ever really seen something like that implemented super well, unless maybe it's like Maw the Void from Wings of Liberty, where there's a mothership, but it's spawned to protect the objective as opposed to just like outright coming and trying to kill the player. But even if it did come and try to kill the player, maybe you could do it earlier in the map before they completed presumably the main and only objective, if that makes sense. So that might be a way to make that work a little more clearly. Is make it spawn before the player actually completes the main objective. Because then, you know, if they assume the mission's going to end, then they probably may not be prepared or even try to prepare for it all. So just kind of some thoughts on how that could work. Same with maybe the wolves with that other map. But I really like this Protoss faction. I liked how it was like shield focused. Like you could do a bunch of weird stuff with like how many shields you had and like shield regeneration. I thought that was neat. So that was fun. And again, when it comes to custom factions, I think unique, but having some familiarity is important, and this really nailed that. Lutz Alkaline submitted Grandson for AoE 2 as their only AoE 2 submission, and I'm happy that they submitted it because it was very good. For AoE 2, it was, you know, those have the potential to go on for like hours. I'm glad this one was like a cool hour. And it was really good. It fit my skill set really well. I don't know how familiar this person was, and maybe they like picked which submission to send me based on what they knew on like my limited knowledge of the game, but I had a really fun time with it. It was not too easy nor too hard. Excuse me, been talking a lot. We're getting close to the end. Yeah, see, there you go, Dude Key. That's what I mean. Can be a little concerning. I'm not really sure what else to say about the AoE 2 submission. I like that you played as the Swiss and how they had like their militia line units be really good. I guess it was kind of like playing the like a more specialized version of the Visigoths, where it was like infantry focused, but rather than flooding with infantry, they were just really good. They were just really strong units, and I appreciated that. Which makes me want to dive maybe a bit more into the AoE 2 custom community, and then maybe we can start seeing what kind of hot garbage they have to offer, as well as the good stuff like what we got here. Dude, Rocket 2 by Venomous. This one was really fun. I remember, honestly, I'd almost compare this a little bit to 3-card Montes, which is like you have a relatively secure base, and it's more about... It's not about building an army and moving out and killing everything. It's about taking a relatively small force and moving very far away from your base so you can't, like, reinforce and, like, hitting specific objectives. And, like, having the Devouring Ones and the Hunter Killers come on and take out the enemy forces for you was really neat. This was one where it had a theme, it had an idea, and it stuck to it. So especially for campaigns, I'd say. You can do this with any map. But I think it's a good idea to have some idea, like a core idea. And in this case, the core idea was, again, small group, tactical group, forces the player to be more careful with their individual group to accomplish individual objectives, as opposed to making an army that sweeps parts of the map away. Obviously, big army sweeping parts of the map away, perfectly fine. If that's your idea, then stick with it. But I think it's, you know, you don't have to accomplish everything in one map. I think it's cool to have, like, a relatively concise idea and do it really well in one map and say, like, okay, this was, like, mission 2 or whatever. The Dark Story, like I said earlier, Zeraland submission, does really well at that, too. And I think this map nailed that pretty good for a StarCraft 1 submission. I think I've really slowed down going through these, spending more time on each submission. Pirates Workday by Ilya. This is another one that got, I think, a bad rap, especially because I got pretty tilted with it. I think I talked at length about this, not just when I played it, but even days after. So it makes it seem like I'm like going really hard on it, which isn't fair. I think it's just because Ilya's been around in a lot of the streams, which I appreciate, and has been asking a lot of questions. To reiterate, this one, really, the enemy was, it was a micro mission. You had limited units, and you had a lot of specialized spellcasters. But the enemy could make battle cruisers and science vessels and ghosts limitlessly, and they would just come in and EMP you and lock you down constantly. Now, you had a counter in that your medics could restore, and it was on autocast, and you had an SCV that had autocast repair, and it worked really well. The issue is, when you're getting EMP'd constantly, you can't use most of your units. So, like, if it's a map where you're intended to be more meticulous with how you use stuff, you're actively removing the player's tools simply by allowing the AI to constantly EMP you. But otherwise, it seemed like a really neat idea, in the sense that you could steal battle cruisers, you could sabotage the power generators. It was kind of like Battle of Braxis, but cooler. So I think the issue is more with the AI's ability to build and use spellcasters as aggressively as they did, as opposed to anything else. The enemy being able to build lots of units and send them at you keeps you on your toes. It kind of adds a soft timer. I think that's all fine. It was really just the specific special abilities. If anything, specifically EMP. Otherwise, I thought it was pretty good. So really, even the most minor of changes, I think, would make that map a lot more palatable to me. Where are we at? Peon Rpg. Dude, this one surprised me. I was skeptical at first because I thought, like, oh, it's another team game that was submitted as single player, but it's gonna be... kind of a goofy thing where I'm going to have to play for 30 minutes and realize I can't progress because it's meant for a team. No, totally doable single player. I think I'd put this one in one of my favorites. This one was just... It was... I don't even know how to describe it. This one was another sort of roguelite arcadey submission. The only thing is I didn't really understand what each of the portraits was supposed to convey a certain type of upgrade you could get, and I understood one was gold and one was like a heart, but some of the portraits of the orc people, I didn't know what any of those meant, so I just picked at random, and then I ended up getting upgrades. And then the game at the end started becoming too much. I think that's where like the team game mechanic came in, but for the start of the game, it was great. So, it was very responsive. I think maybe if you watch it, you'd think that it probably wouldn't work as good as you'd hope. But no, it was actually quite responsive. Maybe playing with more people would make the ping kind of unbearable. But overall, the systems worked great, and it was very fun to play. And I liked how the rooms weren't randomly generated, but what was in the rooms, like what enemies were in the rooms, I should say, and what traps were in the rooms, were random. And yeah, it was really fun. Okay, moving on. I see people are streaming out, and I would too. That's all right. I said I was going to do the retrospective. It's not as long as last year's, and that's because I'm spending less time on each submission. Overmind by Raging Ballista. We played this one yesterday. This one was just sort of confusing. I think that the player was not given the tools necessary to combat the tools that the Protoss had. You were surrounded, and you were harvesting the Overmind's corpse. I think the enemies were just... too strong for the player to deal with, and that, I mean, it's supposed to be more of a holdout, but the terraining of the map was too disjointed. It was very difficult to figure out what paths went in and out of your base, and you'd think that you had defense set up, but then they just sort of randomly show up somewhere that didn't really look like it was a place they should be able to path, but they did. That's probably the main thing that stuck out to me. It was a very aggressive... mod or set of mods to run this, so it seems like it's a bigger project. I'd be curious to see where it goes, but again, I think the terraining in particular needs some work to be a little clearer. Oh, okay, side quest Scrollblade we just played. This one, I never thought of the idea of an auto-scroller RTS RPG. Like, if you told me that, I wouldn't have even known what the heck that was supposed to mean. But Ducky nailed it, as I think Ducky normally does with the stuff they make in StarCraft 2. Very cool arcadey submission. And, again, well beyond what I sort of expected. What this one could have been. But the camera just sort of moves, and if you fall, and you have to keep up with it, and if you fall off the screen, then you die instantly. The boss battles were fine. I think the second one was a little BS, but I think there was an expectation that the player was supposed to grind a little bit, which I did not do. You know, sometimes I'm in the mood for that, and sometimes I'm not. Probably when I'm showcasing for this, I'm not really in the mood for it, which is why I didn't like it that much, the idea of having to grind. But, you know, if I was playing by myself, I don't think I'd have an issue with it. Invicta Wars. I played this one today. I quite liked this one. I was skeptical at the start, but by the end of it, I would verge on putting this one. It's very close to maybe putting it in, like, the favorites category. I'm not so sure. But but this is less about, see, this is where I need to be more careful, because this is more about my personal preference as opposed to, like, thinking that I'm, you know, the crafting of the map in particular, because it's my personal preference with how you push into different areas, you take control of the minor factions, they help you push. It kind of solves that whole end game slogginess that happens in real-time strategy, because you accumulate allies. And so rather than the easy part taking forever, it kind of cleans itself up. The Solas Project. This one went from one of my favorites to one of my least favorites very quickly. I like the first. I loved the faction. I loved the mod. I know I mentioned this when I played, and it's become a bit of a meme, but I have to say it. The mod file was way too big. Having textures take up that much space is an unacceptable thing for players. You just can't expect someone to download a 5 gig mod file for one map. Even if you had a whole campaign, that's too big in my opinion. And that's compressed. That's already compressed. So yeah, Azure Guy had opened it up and found out it was textures that were taking up most of the space, not the music, like we thought. The first section was neat, though, and again, it kind of hit that whole, like, take one idea and stick with it, which is to push out to the 4 areas, destroy the rocks, while defending the other entrants from the Zerg that were coming in and attacking the gates. You had a very limited supply. You had access to unique UED infantry. They all were pretty cool, and some of them were stronger than others, but I had a good time with them. But then the second section, you had an APC, and that was all you could build from. You had a 20-unit supply cap, and the enemy had tons of pre-placed units and spam static defense that stopped you from getting to the AoE virophages. So you were losing units very quickly, and you could... The main issue with that second section was it took your units forever to rebuild. I feel like just for that, I understand the APC building in like a macro section should not be instant, but for that section of that map, if you made the builders like near instant, it doesn't have to be instant, but it has to be faster. It has to be fast. Because you move in, you lose most of your army, and then you go back and you rebuild 20 Marines from your thing, and it takes a minute, and you're doing literally nothing while you sit there and wait for them to build. If that was rectified, I think that whole map would be a great holistic experience. But from the high point of the first part to the really low point of waiting around and doing nothing for a lot of the second part, you know, that was unfortunate. I also think that the supply cap could be increased, because the reason I don't think the build time is important is because the player is constricted by resources regardless. So it doesn't matter whether they have to wait for units to build or not. They only have a limited number of resources, so just let them build the units near instantly. Because it's a micro section anyway. It's not like you're competing with an AI that's building and has a build time limit or anything. So I think removing the build time limit there would be perfectly acceptable. But yeah, the player still has to collect resources anyway. And yes, thank you, Char, for reminding me. Yeah, and just the number of objectives. It didn't need to be 8. It could have been 4, and you could have ended it. So I was pretty spiced by the end of that one. I think deservedly so, though. But that was probably like the most grumbly I was at any of the submissions. And I think, again, a bit deserved, but, you know, I just want to be clear that I did see the positives, especially in the first part of the map, and in the faction, the UED faction, and all that stuff was great. Tarsonis City by Canal? So, this one was great. I thought this was quite good. This is part of the Ascension of Duran Reimagined campaign, which we may or may never actually see done. And This was the one where the Defilers and the Queens... Sorry, I was just deciding if I wanted to go in on the chat or not. Where the Queens and the Defilers came in, and we still couldn't figure it out. I spoke with Nell after, we did some testing, and we just couldn't figure out what it was with the map that I had that made them do that, because other people who played the map did not have the Queens and the Defilers do that. And let me be clear, it's not a big deal. Like, if you survive that, then it's fine. But it was just, the AI ascended to God tier level and just really came at me, you know? So, I think the focus was on that, but in reality, I think the map was good, and it felt like something straight out of Mass Recall, which I think is kind of the objective. It's supposed to feel like StarCraft 1, or at the very least, StarCraft 1 emulated in StarCraft 2, and the hero was really good, too. The hero was very strong, and, you know, it's Terran from StarCraft 1. So it fit really well. I like the holdout section and how you could kill one of the enemy bases to effectively remove them. I really liked... Oh, and this is the main thing, too, I want to point out. I really like the extra abilities that can all add it. They weren't too strong, but they were really useful. Like the Firebat, making Firebats better, and also making the Wraith ground attack better at the cost of draining energy. So you don't have to, you know, if you don't think Cloak is being useful for you at a specific time, you can drain that energy and still use it effectively. The machine spirit of Jat's computer conspired against you. Yeah, right. Let's see. Enemy at the Gate we played today. I'd go so far as to say this was my favorite Liberator mod map from Rossville over the years. I like that you could play as either side. I feel like the artillery was too strong, but that apparently was after it was severely nerfed already, so I'm not so sure how you're supposed to win as the Revolutionaries under the time limit. It seems like playing as one side was just like way, way, way harder than the other. Though, unfortunately, playing as the Federalists, the ones with the artillery, meant that you're mostly just waiting. It takes a long time for the enemy to get to you, at which point it's been like 15 in-game minutes and you've done nothing. You just wait. You could probably be more aggressive, though. You could probably leave your base and go and defend a little outpost instead to do something. I didn't, but you probably could. Spark of Ainlu? Definitely would put this one in the top favorites list. This was completely puzzle solving. Wasn't really... I wouldn't even say this was an RPG. This was just entirely a puzzle. Again, kind of a... You can do it in StarCraft, but should you? I will still hold that opinion, even though I had a lot of fun with this one and would rank it very high because it was crafted so well. But again, as with some others, I'd say, like, you can do it in StarCraft, but maybe you shouldn't. I don't know. It's up for every individual to decide. But I was really impressed with how well-crafted the puzzles were. They weren't too easy. They required me to actually stop and read and think, and I appreciate that. Brood War missed. Exactly. Battle for Darkshore. I would put this one as one of my favorites, actually. And actually, you know what? I have to rewind a little bit, too. Because where was it? I would say, yeah, to rewind a little bit, I would put this one and Red Skies in my potential favorites list, even though Red Skies had that Leviathan at the end. I consider these comparable to, like, the emulation of a vanilla map, in a way. It's kind of like vanilla with a twist, like a spicy vanilla type map, and I think both of these did that really, really well. So getting back to Battle for Darkshore, it was, I think, it hits that canon itch that people like to see, like recreations of WoW in Warcraft 3. I liked the faction, and it felt like something straight out of, like, Curse of the Forsaken by Tomo Raider. And I say that Tomo Raider, in my opinion, makes the best, or top, close to the top best, Warcraft 3 custom campaigns. And so this felt like something, just like a spiritual successor to that, and I think Storm Varsal did a really good job. I hate, like, saying so much about this is just comparing it to some other creator, but it is comparing it to a creator who I really like. But overall, this one was crafted really well. First member coming in with 5 pounds. Thank you so much. Just got back from work. Hope everything is going well. I request a good classic fan of knives. There you go. I don't really know what else to say about this one. I just thought it was like a base map that was really good. But it was big, but it wasn't too big. It also had insane towers on fucking islands, so 1 point removed for that. 1 point off for turrets on islands, but also super strong turrets on islands. Rise of the Clans by Char Dundrid. So my thoughts on this one is it's a fun standalone map, don't get me wrong, but I also feel like in order to appreciate it at the level that I do, you probably need to be familiar with Arcane. If you're not, you're going to have a fine time with it, you're going to enjoy it, but it's going to be more fun if you understand the context that it's in. And we have a lot of submissions like this, but I think this one more than a lot of them. Like, this is one you've really got to understand what's going on in the story, understand how Char is going back and changing the true story to, like, add the new factions. So the one thing that I appreciate is that you can play the map from 3 different perspectives. And that means more just because I know what the older version of this map was. So is that fair to judge it that way? I'm not so sure. But, like, I should say it's almost like it's unfairly positive, right? Because it's not a benefit I necessarily give to other maps, but being able to play as, like, Wrath or Rangul or the Goldex clan, and also, like, they're allied, sort of, but their objectives are different, and you can complete the map and progress through the campaign by accomplishing completely different things, but in doing so, you're still accomplishing the narrative end goal anyway, and propelling the story forward in the same way. So I think that was kind of cool how that all fits together, and I thought that was interesting. I do think that playing as the Goldex clan like I did was unique, but became a little too repetitive, and I think that there needed to be more ways to gather money. And by extension, if you add more ways to gather money, you could make the objective require more money as well. And actually looking at, I think I saw some patch notes or I don't know where, it was somewhere on the forums, you had mentioned you did add some new mechanic to gather money as well. Mechcraft by Bombs, I already talked about. Reclamation of Fellwood by Blabbermouth, we played yesterday. This one was... It was good. It was good. It was hard. I think this one was pretty difficult, and this is another one where I think comparable to some of the other Warcraft 3 more standard missions, it had a lot of different ways the enemy could get to you. There were times I would be like halfway across the map thinking there was no way for the enemy to circumvent me, and then I got hit by like 2 giant attack waves, and I had no idea how they got to me. We eventually ended up using that to our advantage, but this was a good map. Again, standard but fun, as I've been saying. Nailed it pretty well. And just narratively, I think, again, especially like WoW aficionados would appreciate it. Not because it's something that happens in WoW, but it's because, you know, most people are familiar with Fellwood. Gutter Bones! That's right, how could I forget Gutter Bones? Mega Fighter. This was one that, as I had mentioned earlier, I respect and appreciate the time and the gumption and the creativity that it took to build this in StarCraft 2. Once again, it's a we can but should we type thing, and I do think that maybe some more audio feedback could be used for the Wraith attacking and for the Wraith projectile hitting enemies. I also think that a lot more thought needs to be put into how the combat functions, because right now it's really just circle strafe to win, or not, because if multiple enemies lock onto you, you're going to die no matter what. I think there's a few different ways that I remember we discussed. We had some ideas on how you could like lock on enemies and stuff, but as it stands, I do think it's a little too repetitive, but the fundamental idea of flying through 3-dimensional space as like a twin-stick shooter almost. It's not. It's a twin-stick shooter with a 3rd dimension added to it, right? It's there, like you have a ship, you can fly around and shoot at stuff, the enemies exist, they know how to target you. But, you know, making the combat maybe a little more interactive and adding different ways that the player can actually use the ship to do anything would be a big step forward. Shepherds to the Cliff by N Northwest. As I said after I played this one was really short, I have nothing negative to say about this map based on what it was trying to accomplish. You know, I could go through every map and say, like, based on what this map was trying to accomplish, blah, blah, blah. The thing is, I don't know what every map was trying to accomplish. I know what this one was trying to do, and therefore I can judge it based on that and say, like, yeah, it was just trying to tell a short little vignette of a story using atmosphere, and nailed it, right? I wouldn't necessarily say that it competes with the other submissions from, like, of course not from a gameplay perspective, but I do think that it was, it had a nice, strong theme. It did it well. I think it was a little on the nose, but overall, this is, you know, it was something new and unique, and I hope it stands as an example to others to maybe try some new stuff that, you know, I'd be happy to try out and show off in the future, even though it's something totally different. You're not so sure if anyone would care. You know, I'm here to try it out for you, right? And I'll give you my honest opinion when I'm done with it. But I do think that Northwest did a great job for this. It was like just a little mini thing, wrapped up quick, didn't waste any time, did what it tried to do. Good work. Cries of the Lost 3 by Kai2 Hacks. This one was updated mildly just to make it so one of the expansions could actually have some stuff built to it. This one was interesting because you could go around. Once again, as I had said earlier, strong suit was it had an idea and it leaned into it and it stuck to it. It didn't try to do a little bit of one thing and a little bit of another thing. No, it took one idea, which was you cannot build advanced structures. You have to go and take them from the enemy, and then you have to secure those locations because if you lose those buildings, they're gone. So I enjoyed that. Obviously, if the enemy goes around you and happens to destroy those buildings, it can be quite frustrating. But overall, I thought that this was pretty good. The enemy, at least in the original version of the map, had so much production that if you just throwed like a Zerg hard script onto it, one thing that I described is, people might not know this, is if you give them access to unlimited resources and the production structures to make the units, they're gonna go fucking crazy. You might think that it shouldn't be that hard, but if they can replace the units, they will do it instantly. So if you give them like 12 layers, then yeah, they're gonna be able to go ham. So that was the issue I had initially, and that's why I lost. Then I came back and I cheesed it. I think that was a perfectly acceptable way to play the map, though, to be honest, because trying to attack the ground path through was very, very difficult. That's fine, but as I had mentioned with Zai and Taj's map, which we'll get to here in just like 2 or 3 things, is like if you make something very difficult for the player to approach in like the more standard way, they're gonna do whatever they can to get around it, and there's really nothing you can do to stop it. If they have the resources to do it, they're gonna make 48 Mutalisks and snipe an objective. That's just how it's gonna be. So the question is, do you make the rest easier to the point where it would cost them the same amount of time, effort, and resources as if they would have made 48 Mutalisks that they could beat it any other way in order to kind of bring that in line and give it parity? If not, then you can't be surprised if someone's going to just snipe the objectives. But that's a perfectly acceptable way to win, in my opinion. All Skeletons Must Die by God of Cinder. I hesitate to put this one on my list of favorites, but it's close. This was it was a really, really big map. I think it was one of the best RPG maps, and it was really fun. I mean, I wish I had more to say. It was just really fun. It wasn't super hard or anything. I do think that it was really well balanced for single player, and it will balance itself based on the number of plays you add because of experience and items and how those get dispersed. I was nowhere close to even scratching the surface of this map, though. We were nowhere close to finishing it, and it was made for more people, so this is another one I'd kind of chalk up to, again, really fun, but meant for more people. The difference with this one, though, is that it was completely acceptable to play it by yourself. Totally approachable. There's nothing about it that would have made it harder to play as solo versus with more people. And then, in an instant, by Zion Taj, which is the last one on the list. This one, I really... Well, I mean, I had already talked about this, which is like I used Mutalisk to snipe... Not Mutalisk, I used Air to snipe the objective. I used Void Rays. I think this is one where it was just the enemy defenses were a little too... a little too challenging to do, so of course the player's just going to make air units and snipe it, in my opinion. I don't know why someone would make it like so much harder on themselves when they could just fly around the map. But overall, I really liked the Nerazim faction here. I liked how they had a mobile nexus. There were a lot of little things about this map that I did like. I did think that the AI in general was just a little too strong. God, I feel like I have such a bad reputation. I think this is just me being self-conscious. I don't know if anyone actually thinks this. Oh, we're offline. Hold on. Hold on. We're coming back. We had a hiccup. Don't worry. We're coming back. Hello? Testing, testing. Are we here? Are we online? Don't worry, we're coming back. Apologies, we had a brief hiccup in the internet. It went down and came immediately back up. Okay, so we were on the last one, right? You all heard me start to talk about Zion Taj's. So I liked a lot of the little things about this one. I liked the faction that you played as specifically. It was just, I think that the enemy AI was too strong, and what I had said was I get very self-conscious ever saying that a map is too hard. Actually, that's the issue. I'm not saying that the map was too hard per se. I think there were elements to it that were not implemented in a way that made the player incentivized to like try anything other than make air units and fly around the map. So the question is, it's not that I think it was too hard. Like, just because I can't win doesn't mean I think it's too hard. It's more that I think that by making it the way that it is, in that it's, I think the AI, especially the anti-ground stuff that the AI had, was too hard, it works against the map and stops the player from trying a lot of the interesting things that you have implemented for them to use. So hopefully that clarifies. Because again, I think I'm self-conscious of ever being like, I think this was too hard, because there's always the people that are like, well, of course you think that because you're not very good or whatever. Like, I don't care that people don't think I'm very good, but I do think that I work very hard, or I try at least. I think I'm okay at it to be articulate with how I describe when I think something's too hard and for what reason. I understand, Printer, that the internet disconnected for a second. All right. So hopefully, again, that sort of clarifies things. I don't know what else to say now. We did it. We get through the whole list. My God, 57. The map funnels you into just one tactic. Sure. And if that's intended, that's fine. And it doesn't even if it's more if you expect the player to do anything else, you're gonna have a problem. If you expect the player to do anything else, you're gonna be disappointed. Did I miss anybody's? I don't think so. I went through the whole list. It's the same list that's on the Discord. My God. And then, of course, we have the list of Jabo Venge. I'm not going to be here next week. Taking a break. We're taking a weekend off. My family's coming to stay with us as well. But even if they weren't, I would take a week off. I think I've earned it. Enjoy yourselves next weekend. Find someone else to watch. We had one submission per mental age is right. I think my favorite one would either be the time loop one where the workers could finger of death, or the one where the workers... Which one could the workers finger of death? I know which one. I know you're talking about foreseen consequences, but I'm not sure about the second one. I would love to hear folks in the chat. Please share with me which your favorite submission was, and you can't say your own. Which submission other than your own, if you were a submitter, was your favorite one? Or you know, list multiples. I'd love to hear what people thought were their favorites. Looking at the ones that I have listed in my favorites, I definitely had a lean this year towards the more RPG, roguelite-ish ones, for sure. Oh, Waking the Netherdrake had workers that could death coil. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I see a couple people saying Waking the Netherdrake. Char Dundrid is the one with the Finger of Death? Spark of Ainlu. Longtime fan of the Architect. I would expect that from you, Milestone. Yes, yes. Looking forward for all the VODs and final verdicts. Spark of Ainlu, Foreseen Consequences. Waking the Netherdrake or Rise of the Clans. The one with the Banshees on Blight, that's Foreseen Consequences. Oxygen had really great gameplay and atmosphere. I don't want to say Waking the Netherdrake and Mechcraft. Or you want to say Waking the Netherdrake and Mechcraft. Foreseen Consequences. The Warcraft 3 Thief map was nice. Yeah. Microcraft and revamped Black Rock and Roll. Revamped. Rise of the Necrons. All right. Very nice. I will say, it seems like a lot of people are in line with my thinking as well. I feel like I probably am going to have to go back and watch myself play Waking the Netherdrake, if only because of the feedback that I'm saying here. Because again, I saw the positives to that map, but I think I was just so befuddled right at the end of it that it might have colored my reaction to it. The one thing that Waking the Netherdrake did is it gave you insane amounts of power right from the start. So I think I do need to go back and kind of give that the credit that it's due. Like, you could just make Warlocks and call down Infernals literally from minute 1 of the game. That was pretty cool. Mechcraft was cool. I agree. You know, I really like that Duke Phoenix's map. It says Phoenix Gaming 17. Definitely not the same person. Appreciate the effort that went into Kraken's Last Stand, if not, at least for the voice acting. See, and that's you know, it's interesting you say that. Not the voice acting part, but the effort part. And that's why I tried to term it. What did I say it was? I said it was superfluous chaos. Because I feel like there's so many maps that I play where I recognize the insane amount of work that goes into them that sometimes just doesn't translate out into the end product. Like, it's there, but the player never necessarily interacts with it in a meaningful way, such that you could have allowed the AI to cheat, and it would have given the player the same experience, if that makes sense. So it's more that it's not for me like saying it's a negative for people who are being like, hey, why'd you bother putting all this effort in, but more like maybe this is a lesson that can be taken, which is like sometimes you can spend forever building a system that you didn't have to because you could have made the same effect, but like I guess it's more of the accomplishment of doing it as well. Like, hey, I was able to make it so the AI didn't need to cheat with resources to do this. And I think that's actually a really important and interesting feat. Again, the question is, for an end product, is that necessary? Whether you do it or not is up to you. You know, whether it's important, whether like it needs to be in there or not, you know, always subjective. But that's why I've created the term to say I think there's some maps where there's insane systems going on in the backdrop that don't actually matter in a meaningful way, and therefore, you know, you could consider not having them or not. I don't know. It's different. It's different for everyone. Draking the Netherwake. Oh, okay, I need to stop. We just did like an hour and something, hour and a half of recap.